Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the bookshelf. I'm your host, Woody, and with me is.
Lone gamer who is awake, and I apologize for falling asleep on you guys last time.
Don't worry about it. Things did happen. But anyway, sadly, Dreamer Girl couldn't be with us today as she had some personal stuff to take care of. But that leads us into our topic today is, yes, WrestleMania season may be over and done now. The dust has settled. We've all got our thoughts and opinions on WrestleMania, but that doesn't mean the show stops at all. Because
No.
this week, because today, the gamer and I will be discussing the two biggest factions of the Attitude Era. That being D-Generation X and the n.W.o. I mean, if you were around in the Attitude Era, maybe even a little bit earlier, you were either wearing the black and white of the n.W.o or the green and black of the Generation X.
Mm-hmm. Now,
So
remind me, Woody, who came first?
it actually was the n.W.o
Yeah, I had a feeling it was the n.W.o. I just couldn't remember.
because the n.W.o actually debuted in New Japan's Battle Formation show at the Tokyo Dome in April 1996.
I was only 5 years old then. Wow.
So obviously, because it was Japan and obviously the relationship WCW had with New Japan at the time, that the n.W.o was brought over to the US, and leading to that infamous moment at Bash at the Beach where Hogan was the third man.
Mm-hmm.
And thus the big three of the n.W.o, Hogan, Hall, and Nash, was born. And at the end of the day, the n.W.o, it had so many members during the day. Did it? Didn't it? At one point, there was such members as like Dusty Rhodes, Rick Rude, Bret Hart, Kurt Hennig, IRS, and of course two people that we will discuss a bit later in the episode. One being Six, who would later be known as X-Pac, and obviously later on Shawn Michaels. But yeah, the original lineup back in 1996 that ran until 1998, it was Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan, of course turning heel and becoming Hollywood Hulk Hogan,
Mm-hmm.
Ted DiBiase, who left in 1997 to form to manage the Steiner brothers, the Giant, who would later become the Big Show, Sting, Six, Vincent, or who you might know as Virgil, Miss Elizabeth, Eric Bischoff, Buff Bagwell, Michael Wall Street, better known as IRS, Scott Norton, Big Bubba Rogers, Scott Masahiro Chono, the Macho Man Randy Savage, the Great Muta, Conan, Kurt Hennig, Rick Rude, Dusty Rhodes, Brian Adams, Scott Steiner, the Disciple, and referee Nick Patrick.
Yeah, good portion of those I couldn't remember, or I had no idea they were part of the n.W.o.
Yep. Oh, I mean, you've also even at that time, even after that original lineup, you had the two warring factions of the NWO. You had the classic black and white Hollywood, and then you had the black and red Wolfpack.
Now, who started the Wolf Pack?
That was Kevin Nash.
Okay.
Because if I remember rightly, they kicked Kevin Nash out of the NWO. He formed his own n.W.o, the Wolfpack. With other former members that were kicked out of the NWO.
Okay.
So that the Wolfpack was Kevin Nash, the Macho Man Randy Savage, Conan, Kurt Hennig, Scott Hall, Dusty Rhodes, Miss Elizabeth, Rick Rude, Lex Luger, and Sting.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Hulk Hogan was running his own heel team with it was Hulk Hogan, Bischoff, the Disciple, who some of you might remember as Brutus Beefcake in the 90s. Brian Adams, Scott Steiner, Scott Norton, Vincent, Big Show, Scott Hall, Dusty Rhodes, obviously until he got thrown out. Sting, Miss Elizabeth, Kurt Hennig, Rick Rude, Buff Bagwell. Stevie Ray was a member at one point. Horace Hogan was also in there, and Mark Johnson. But obviously, some of those had been thrown out and joined the Wolfpack.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously you've got the B team, which was another B team, which was a team of n.W.o members made up of minor league wrestlers. Where you had Stevie Ray, the Giant, Kurt Hennig, Vincent, Scott Norton, Brian Adams, and Horace.
Hmm.
So these were still like guys on the mid card. And then obviously the last WCW lineup of the n.W.o was the n.W.o 2000, which was Bret Hart for some reason, Kevin Nash, Jeff Jarrett,
That I remember.
Scott Hall, and Scott Steiner with the Nitro Girls and Ron and Don Harris as their bodyguards.
Hmm.
And then obviously you had the n.W.o Japan from 1996, which had Masahiro Chono, Hiro Saito, Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Sting, Scott Norton, Bagwell, Great Muta, IRS, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, 6, Rick Bogner. So yes, we had both Scott Halls in there. So we had both Razor Ramones in there at one point. Brian Adams, Satoshi Kojima, Yuji Nagata, and Masa Saito. Who that was obviously the Japan side of things. So yeah, there was a number of WCW legends on that roster that either wore the black and white or the red and black at some point in their career.
Mm-hmm.
So when would you say you were watching some of this n.W.o stuff? Was it in the Hollywood era?
Yeah, I would definitely have to say the Hollywood era because that version of the group I fondly remember.
Yeah, the 98 and 99 era when the Hogan, Hall, Nash.
Mm-hmm.
Bischoff. They were all part of the lineup. Yeah, I mean, I do sort of remember the sort of late 90s era as well. Uh, Obviously, Hogan didn't last long in the n.W.o, and because if you remember at Road Wild '99, he left the n.W.o and turned back to face again, donning the red and the yellow and red once again, feeling the power of Hulkamania surging through his veins and becoming American made once again. So to me, I think the n.W.o wasn't exactly well known for the matches they had.
It's for the promos,
it was the moments they created.
The promos backstage.
You know, we all remember Hogan spray painting the n.W.o logo on the belt.
Oh yeah.
You know, we all remember, the victims of the n.W.o getting n.W.o spray painted on their back.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, there wasn't just wrestlers that were part of the n.W.o. No. Because in 1996, did you know that NASCAR driver Kyle Petty became a member?
Really?
Yep.
Huh.
And that was simply because WCW was running with the external promotional stuff because it had monster trucks, and it also started running some actual NASCARs. And Kyle Petty at the time was driving the n.W.o NASCAR.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if anyone out there might actually know whatever happened to that n.W.o NASCAR after the 1997 season, feel free to let us know. Obviously, the most famous member at the time was Dennis Rodman, the Chicago Bulls basketball player.
Yeah, I vaguely remember him being there.
Well, he was. Well, if you think about it, when he joined the n.W.o in 1997, he was one of the biggest names in basketball at the time. You know, especially with his flamboyant looks
Mm-hmm.
and out there personality.
Oh yeah.
You also remember TBS's Dinner and a Movie? Well, you had Paul Gilmartin, the host of that show, join the n.W.o.
That I clearly don't remember.
Well, he only joined for one night only at Clash of Champions 35 in 1997. And then you have a number of Japanese baseball players, soccer players, cyclists, sumo wrestlers, and such joining n.W.o Japan for one night only or special events. Though, and then again, you could also got to say is that n.W.o also had a number of subgroups that were active through various years as well. Because many of us might remember the Wolfpack, which was Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and X-Pac from 96 to 2002. Some of us might remember the Outsiders, the famous tag team of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Yeah, and their many title wins. Vicious and Delicious, which was Scott Norton and Buff Bagwell. Don't know if you remember that one.
No, I don't.
Sting and Lex Luger.
Obviously, can't gotta remember them.
The Harris brothers of Ron and Don Harris.
Hmm. And I don't
And
mean to sidetrack you on this, Woody, but shout out to Lex Luger finally becoming a Hall of Famer.
yes, and can we also mention with Lex Luger? Big up to DDP for really helping Luger out, and now he's standing as well.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, big on up to Lex. Things finally looking up for the total package.
Oh yeah.
And then the final tag team from the era, obviously the two dudes with attitude, which was Shawn Michaels and Kevin Nash.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously they'd had their tag team run in the WWF in the 90s, and then they continued it in 2002 when Kevin Nash and Shawn Michaels were both in the n.W.o in the WWF. And that's the nice segue, Oh, well, after WCW folded and was bought out by the WWF, a number of big name WCW talent jumped ship. Some of them had good careers in the WWF.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Goldberg, for one of them, Booker T, Hulk Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those guys did really well. Some of them not so good. Because, look what happened to Conan in the WWF.
Yeah.
That guy was sadly buried and gotten rid of. Chris Canyon also suffered a similar fate. But in at No Way Out 2002, when Vince McMahon and Ric Flair were battling over control of the WWF, Vince McMahon put out what perhaps the greatest promo he'd ever created.
And before this episode, Woody showed me a link to the shorter version of it. And I tell you what, I don't know if any of you will agree with me. I got major J. Jonah Jameson vibes from that promo.
It's literally, Vince McMahon sat in a chair with a plaster on his head. It is the most intense, angry promo from Vince. Really cussing out Ric Flair for stealing his creation. And the promo ends with, him staring into the camera and being like, I will kill the WWF with a lethal dose of poison.
And on the back of the chair, n.W.o.
Yep, and in 2002, the n.W.o debuted in the WWF. This is when the n.W.o that finally made the jump to the from WCW to WWF. You had the big three: Hogan, Hall, and Nash. Yeah, and let's be real. Let's be real. When it comes to the n.W.o, Hogan, Hall, and Nash will always be the iconic trio.
Oh yeah, the ones that started it.
Yeah, and the fact is that they went out and they started targeting all the big names on the roster: Stone Cold, The Rock, Kane, Undertaker, Ric Flair. Nobody, it kind of felt like we were back in the 90s when nobody was safe. We had the Scott Hall taking out Stone Cold and spray painting n.W.o on his back.
Mhm.
We had Hulk Hogan and The Rock clashing multiple times. Including Hogan taking his weight belt off and whipping The Rock. Yeah, shades
That's,
of.
that's where he got that idea from to use on Cody Rhodes.
Exactly, but that was shades of the '90s.
Oh, yeah.
We all remember Hulk Hogan taking his weight belt off, twirling it around, and whipping people with it
Mm-hmm.
back in the late '90s. And then, obviously, in mid to just after No Way Out, X Pac came back to the fold once again, becoming the fourth man. So they're cashing in on the '90s. And then afterwards, they got the Big Show as a member. So yeah, well, I think the sad thing about it is I think the whole n.W.o storyline really ground to a halt was after the now infamous plane ride from hell in 2002.
I very, very vaguely remember that.
It was basically a flight. There was a Dark Side of the Ring episode on it, but basically, it was a whole incident on a flight from, I think it was Europe to the US, where the WWF stars on there basically got drunk and caused all kinds of shenanigans,
Oh, yeah,
including,
now I remember.
including Kurt Hennig and Brock Lesnar literally having a shoot fight in the aisle. You got Ric Flair absolutely blind drunk, flashing the waitresses. And one of the most infamous photos that came out of that was Scott Hall literally being wheeled off the plane and through the airport on the other side in a wheelchair, practically out cold. And I think it was at that time Scott Hall's alcoholism that started to get the better of him
Mm-hmm.
again, which sadly, a demon he never failed. He kind of failed to conquer. Which eventually, left, ended up with Hall being fired, along with X Pac and, as well. Which is a shame.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, after all that, the n.W.o and WWF kind of died out. Hulk Hogan, was already gone back to being a baby face, going back to the whole Hulk still rules gimmick. But they still make a bit. Hogan, Hall, and Nash still made many appearances as the n.W.o across the years, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
After that,
I think
even
their last appearance as the n.W.o, if I remember right, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was the
mhm.
WrestleMania match between Sting and Triple H. Am I wrong?
I think so. Oh no, it was after that. It was after that. Oh yeah, it was actually, yeah. That was their last WWF appearance, but they'd still appeared as the n.W.o at various other promotions, like, well up to like 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be real as well. Who could really, really forget, the cultural impact the NWO left
Yeah.
on the wrestling world?
That was just a faction back in the day nobody could touch.
Yeah, and I mean, even now you have groups that try and capture the success of the NWO, like the Bullet Club in New Japan. But I mean, and even attempts to recreate the Bullet Club in the US, it just hasn't worked in the
And
same way that the
the
NWO did.
NWO, because what they did, it was just so unique, it was hard to top.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. But yeah, and we all remember the too sweet gesture that too sweet, a gesture that has lived on in infamy since 1996.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, all people have to do, as a wrestling fan, is wear an NWO shirt and put up the too sweet gesture, and that's all it is.
And that's all she wrote.
Yep. But on the flip side, in the WWF on August 11th, 1997, on Raw, when Mick Foley won his first ever WWF title, when Tony Schiavone infamously said, well, that'll Mick Foley, Cactus Jack winning the WWF title, that'll put butts in seats. We first saw a group of degenerates. Yes, that group of degenerates, I'm fairly sure they got a number of kids in trouble in 2000s, whether it was for the t-shirts that had those two words on the front.
What were those two words?
Suck it! I'm fairly sure, as teenagers in the 2000s, we all got in trouble for crotch chop, doing the infamous crotch chop, and telling people to suck it. But we all, DX, that group of loudmouth, rambunctious degenerates that ran riot from 1997 to 2018 in various incarnations. Some of us here who are wrestling fans, we might remember the first lineup, which was Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Chyna, and Rick Rude for a brief period.
Mm-hmm. And before we get carried away here, Woody showed me something as soon as he mentioned this, because I forgot Rick Rude was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
He did what? Raw and Nitro in the same night?
Yep.
That's crazy.
Now, and you got to remember, even though you could tell it was one was pre-taped and the other was live, hence why, on Nitro, on Raw, he has the full beard, and on Nitro, he has the classic Rick Rude mustache.
And
He has the
stash,
classic.
yeah.
You could tell, but it was just the fact that one guy was on both WCW and WWF at the same time. Something unheard of.
And something like that is still kind of unachievable, even to this day.
It'd be like today, right? Today, if AJ Styles was on Raw and AEW Dynamite on the same night.
Yeah.
See,
Man,
that's
DX.
yep. So the original lineup was they were Mick Foley's they were the original founding member where the Rick Rude was Michael's bodyguard, and then you also had Mike Tyson, who joined in the run up to WrestleMania. But then I think a lot of people really do remember the second lineup more than anything else.
Because that was Triple H, Shawn Michaels.
You had Triple H, Shawn Michaels, China, X-Pac, Road Dogg, and Billy Gunn.
Mm-hmm. The more famous version lineup of the group.
Yeah, I mean, some
The
people
more
might remember.
memorable one.
Yeah, some people might even remember the version 3 where they dropped Shawn Michaels and it was just, Triple H, China, X-Pac, Road Dogg, and Billy Gunn.
Mm-hmm. But we all know how that ended up, and
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that group of degenerates. That's all I need. All we need to say.
the shenanigans they came up with.
Yep.
Not even
And then,
half the stuff that were up to back in the day they could get
yep.
away with in this era.
Yep.
Oh man.
And obviously, 1998 and 1990. I think the clear point where DX became the big group was when DX tried to invade WCW. When they all donned army fatigues, they were driving around a jeep, and they turned up at a at a Coliseum in Virginia to invade WCW.
Didn't they come up in a tank as well one time?
That was well, that was literally them waging war on WCW. It was just, I think that kind of established them as something.
As a real group.
Yeah. And then obviously, the New Age Outlaws joining the group and becoming tag team champions.
Mm-hmm.
And who could forget that classic intro that everyone always knows? All we need to say is, "Oh, you didn't know?"
Mm-hmm. Better call somebody.
Exactly. Road Dogg and Mr. Ass coming down to the ring, cutting that classic promo.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will say this. Compared to the n.W.o, DX had some pretty good matches.
Yeah, they did.
Involving some of their gimmicks.
Yeah. I agree. Especially when the Outlaws winning the WWF tag titles on multiple occasions, and
Mm-hmm.
actually having some good matches.
Mm-hmm. I think it was. I know this was a tag team match. It was Triple H and Shawn Michaels while they were in DX at one time.
Mm-hmm.
I forget who they were wrestling. I think I can't remember, but somebody hit Triple H and he was teetering like this, and Shawn Michaels in their corner was going,
Oh, that was during the. We'll get to that later. That was the 2000s, the mid 2000s reunion with Triple H and Shawn Michaels, and that was in their infamous feud with the Spirit Squad.
Yeah, we're gonna save that for later because they came up with
Because
some good stuff.
that was, yeah. So then the 90s. Towards the end of the 90s, Triple H left the group, leaving pretty much the Outlaws, X-Pac, and Kane as the sole members. You know, to me, I think it was pretty much a sad day. You know, for us kids in 2000, seeing
Hmm.
the DX finally coming to an end. With the guys, some of the guys moving on to other stuff. But then obviously in 2006, Shawn Michaels came back, didn't he? And Triple H was in, and that's when they started teasing that whole DX thing. Shawn Michaels would do the occasional cross chop. He'd do the crossed arms on
Hmm.
the turnbuckle, and then obviously, in June 2006, DX came back with Triple H and Shawn Michaels,
And
and
this was when if I remember right, Vince McMahon had the Spirit Squad completely just jump Triple H.
Yep,
And
Shawn
then all
Michaels
you see at the entrance of the ramp, one of the Spirit Squad members just getting absolutely yeeted onto the ramp. And then Shawn Michaels just comes out.
Yep.
And then he goes into the ring, saves Triple H, and then royally piss off Vince McMahon.
Yep. Oh, and this is where, even in their advanced age, DX was still a pair of degenerates.
Oh, this is where they came up with their good stuff.
I mean, this is where they would royally screw with Vince McMahon and who can remember that infamous night on Raw when Triple H and Shawn Michaels hijacked the production truck and messed with and royally screwed with Vince McMahon's microphone? Or or creating another three-word chant for Vince. Who could forget Vince loves cocks?
Oh. And then
who could?
And then
Who
the
could
infamous dumping whatever
feces
was on him.
Yes. On Vince, Shane, and the Spirit Squad. And yes, that was the 5-on-2 handicap match where Triple H takes a jump off the top rope, takes a boot to the chin.
And he's going like this.
He's
Shawn Michaels
literally
is basically playing like,
he's just watching. I mean, I even love the fact that Shawn's literally blowing on him, trying to get him, trying to stop him falling over. Absolutely fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously Hornswoggle joining the group for a brief period.
Oh God! Oh, that's another segment. That's funny.
Yeah, well, if I remember rightly, didn't Hornswoggle take them to court because they didn't let him join?
Not just court, little people court.
Oh, that was a whole comedy segment in itself.
Mm-hmm. Or probably one of the most infamous DX things. I think it was during a DX thing. I'll just say these 4 words, and Woody will know what I mean. I just can't stand.
Oh, where Sean realized he wasn't controversial. So he went nuts backstage and started kicking random people.
And then he goes up to who is now Sean Spears.
Yeah.
At the time.
So
like, what's your name?
Watch it. Stan. Sweet chin music.
I just can't stand. Then he goes off and kicks somebody else.
Yep. Of course, this was also the same time when DX spray painted a big DX logo on Titan Towers. And then they also spray painted DX logos and suck it all over Vince McMahon's private jet. Who could forget that?
Or who could forget probably my favorite segment of DX of all time? Triple H and Shawn Michaels portraying Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon.
Oh, Triple H coming out as Vince McMahon, even doing the exaggerated walk.
And then Shawn Michaels dancing like Shane McMahon. And then I remember he was doing that in the ring, and Triple H as Vince says, "Stop it!"
And Shawn just falls over. Oh. I mean, the thing is, it's also going back to the 90s, DX always had an unhealthy disrespect for authority figures. I mean, who could forget in the 90s when they clashed with Sergeant Slaughter? And they put the face masks on with the windscreen wipers. And nicknamed him Sergeant Slobber. Oh man! And that was one of the times when basically DX pranked the bejesus out of Sergeant Slaughter because the idea was that he would put Shawn Michaels and Triple H in a match in Christmas 1997 for the European title. What happened in the match was Shawn Michaels laid in the middle of the ring. Triple H ran the ropes for 10 minutes. And I'm just out there thinking, yep, that's DX all to a T.
Oh, yeah.
So, but then again, DX, they had numerous reunions over the years and they've had multiple members. I mean, even, I think it was a couple of years ago when they reunited all the core members of DX in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm. And now aren't each member of DX in the Hall of Fame themselves?
Yes. So DX is now officially in the Hall of Fame now. So
as a group and as individual members.
I don't think all the members are in individually yet. But I know DX as a group is.
Yeah. And just again for the Hall of Fame, congrats on Triple H getting on the Hall of Fame on his own.
Yep.
The headliner of the Hall of Fame this year.
Yep. And you know what? I'm also glad that China is in the Hall of Fame as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, who could forget the cultural impact of what DX left behind? I mean, arguably, DX was as big as the n.W.o in terms of its popularity, the merchandise they sold,
mm-hmm.
the members, the moments they created.
Yeah, they both had their moments. But I will have to give this to DX over n.W.o.
Mm-hmm.
DX had pretty good matches.
Yep. But here's my question for you, Gamer. When you were a teenager in this era, were you proudly wearing the green and black and running up and down the halls cross shopping, or
Yep.
were you wearing the either the red and black or the black and white, telling everyone it was too sweet?
I was doing this, baby.
Oh, you were a proud degenerate.
Oh yeah.
You were a degenerate.
Proud of it.
And to be fair, at the time I was more into WWF than WCW, so I didn't go back to watching older WCW till much later. So, but yeah, I have to admit, I was also a proud degenerate myself.
What was what is one of your favorite DX moments?
Oh, now that's a tough one. I think it would be from the 2006 reunion run, and I think to me it was the whole. It wasn't just a moment, but I think the whole messing with Vince McMahon was just pure
Yeah,
comedy. Was a pure gold mine.
because
Whether it was the whole Vince loves Cox, that starting the whole Vince loves Cox movement, messing with his microphone on Raw and taking over the production truck. And even down to
spray painting all over the private jet.
yeah, even with the moment with the production truck when you got Coach back trying to get entry, Sean just opens the door into his face, goes hello, hello, goes back inside. Yeah, messing. I think my favorite out of that though was that whole segment was the messing with the microphone.
Yeah,
Ruining whether it was silencing him, raising or lowering the volume, making him sound like Alvin and the Chipmunk, Barry White, writing Vince I love Cox on the screen.
I wonder how much of that was planned out and scripted, or how much of that was just pulled out of their asses.
I think it was mostly planned, but it was played off so fantastic. Especially when it ends with the short music video of the excrement being dumped on the Spirit Squad and Vince, with them rolling around on the floor. Cut to the DX theme. That was just. Yeah, that brings a tear to the eye. Yeah, sometimes you laugh at that so hard that you cry.
Oh yeah.
So, I'm asking you, what was your favorite DX moment or match?
Like I said, my favorite moment was the whole Triple H and Shawn Michaels being Vince and Shane McMahon. I mean, they parodied those two so well.
Yeah,
every time I see it, I damn near piss myself. I'm laughing that hard.
it's fantastic. Okay, but next one to that is your favorite n.W.o moment, be it from the classic era or the WWF era.
I'm gonna have to go with the classic era.
Mm-hmm. You're going back to the 90s WCW,
where they revealed Hogan was the third man.
Yeah, I would have to agree with there. I think
a history-breaking moment right there.
Yeah, I don't think there really is much of a greater moment in the history of the n.W.o.
Then
as Hogan
starting like that.
Hogan being the third man at Bash at the Beach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they n.W.o. did have some great moments later on, whether it was them power bombing Bischoff into the history books.
Mm-hmm.
spray painting NWO on Goldberg's back. Putting the spray painting NWO on the big gold belt.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be real, their reign of terror over the WCW for years.
Oh yeah. Like I said, that was a group that no one could touch for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. The NWO had a real reign of terror over WCW.
Yeah, granted, there's been other groups back in the day that tried to do the same thing, or later on, like the Nation of Domination.
Yeah, the Bullet Club.
Mm-hmm. Nobody could touch the
NWO.
amount of chutzpah as the NWO.
I mean, also, let's be real. That classic NWO shirt that they wore back then is still being sold now, and it still makes a crazy amount of money.
Oh yeah,
it still sells like crazy. That just goes to show that even 30 years later, almost 30 years down the line, just how much of an impact the NWO made on the wrestling world.
Oh yeah.
And you think of how many gimmicks, factions, and wrestlers just came and went in that 96, 97 era that just, is consigned to the history books.
Oh yeah. If any of them survive from people being powerbombed into them.
Yes, that's true. And then you look at the NWO being around in 1996 and still being
one of the top factions in history.
Yeah. And like you say, Gamer, I don't think the NWO will ever be touched in terms of, the impact and popularity they had.
And like you keep saying, their reign of terror compared to other groups, untouchable.
Yeah, I mean, did DX mess with the authority figures? Absolutely. But, think of the whole...
They were more focused on the, haha, I'll make fun of you kind of aspect.
Yeah, we made fun of Sergeant Slaughter. We made him fall down. We're cool. But you think then you look at the NWO, you see that whole reign of terror, fear, and paranoia they spread throughout that WCW roster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, even so much as that even the video games and TV shows and pay-per-views also had WCW versus NWO in the title. Meaning this was an entire organization versus 3 guys. When you're at that point in the wrestling world when you've got Hogan, Hall, and Nash literally just having an entire organization against them.
Everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, even the fact is they even had their own referees for matches as well. I think that's...
Man. Either way you look at it, NWO, DX, they've made their footstep in history for life.
Yeah, well, you know what they say, when you're NWO, you're NWO for life. But yeah, I mean,
and arguably, if you don't like DX,
we've got
they
2
can just
words
tell you to
for
suck
you.
it.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's, you can't really talk about the whole history of wrestling, especially in the 90s, without really talking about the cultural impact that, DX and NWO had.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about it as well, if you think about it, the whole DX and NWO stuff, their gimmicks bled into real life.
Oh yeah.
Can you name any other gimmick in history of wrestling where their gimmick, their catchphrase, whatever, bleeds into everyday pop culture?
No. And I'll be honest, if NWO and DX weren't as popular as they are, a lot of factions, groups, tag teams, they wouldn't be as popular if DX or NWO didn't go through, in my
Exactly.
opinion.
I mean, you also think, you think in that like 99, 2000 era TV, right? You think of how much that suck it catchphrase and the crotch chop bled into, just everyday TV. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that even the DX crotch chop made its way into Mean Girls.
I
You,
forgot
you
that was a
know,
thing.
the fact that the DX crotch chop made its way into Mean Girls just shows that how much impact Degeneration X had on everyday pop culture.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think the runaway success of DX really came from Shawn Michaels' influence back then.
Oh yeah.
Because if you think about, Shawn Michaels in that, mid to late 90s era, he really was living that rebellious rock star life.
Oh yeah.
Whether it was, all the drug taking, the partying, the clashes with authority, the rebellious acts on TV.
Mm-hmm.
He was a perfect fit to lead a group of degenerates. He was the perfect guy at the time to be the leader of DX.
Oh yeah.
Then you got Triple H and how his gimmick evolved at the time with the whole being the degenerate in the 90s, the evolution into the whole the game, winning the WWF title.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously using that DX as a springboard to push himself even further up the ladder.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you think about, sit there and think, would Triple H really have been, the cerebral assassin, the
The King
game,
of Kings.
the King of Kings without, evolving past the degenerate?
No.
You think about how X-Pac, could he, X-Pac, the Outlaws, what would have happened to them if DX hadn't have worked?
They probably wouldn't have been as popular as they are.
Yeah, you think of it like how over the Outlaws were, especially, and how, you know, and this is what I'll always say, people always deride Road Dogg in recent years for saying he was the best entertainer on the roster. And I actually agree with him. He never said he was a great wrestler.
He was a
He said he
great
was,
entertainer.
and he could get the crowd going just with that. Oh, you didn't know?
And he can still get people going with that.
Yeah, you think it is. You got to think it's 1999. It's you're turning on Raw. You're watching. You've seen the opponents come out. Next thing you know, you hear that infamous. All you hear on there is, "Oh, you didn't know." Down, 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 down.
You better call somebody.
Yeah, then you see that him more down there. It's me, it's me. It's that D.O. What? Here's the thing: was Road Dogg really the best wrestler on the roster? Absolutely not. Could he cut one hell of? All I'm going to say is that could he cut one hell of a promo?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt.
Exactly. We all know that out of the Armstrong's family, Brad Armstrong and Bullet Bob were the best wrestlers on that roster.
Oh, yeah.
Brian, sadly, he must have not paid that much attention in the wrestling lessons because he was okay. He was okay.
Well, you also remember another person who pulled off probably one of the most memorable promos.
Yep.
And I could sum it up in 2 words. Steiner math.
Yeah, well, he was a member of the n.W.o for a while, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so yeah. Wow. Well, we've ranted and raved and promoed for an hour on DX versus n.W.o. Yeah.
This episode made me feel good.
Well, to be fair, I'm one of them ones who believe, it doesn't matter whether you wore the Wolfpack colors, whether you wore the classic n.w.o colors, or you wore the
or you were telling teachers and fellow students to suck it,
or wearing the green and black and walking up the aisle, walking the corridors of school and being a degenerate. It's hard to deny what they did, what mark they left on the wrestling industry, and I think
what presence they still have in every generation to come,
and even 30 years down the line, it's hard. It's. I always say it's hard to imagine what the wrestling landscape would have looked like without these factions.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you go back to the n.w.o at the time when Hulk Hogan was in WCW at the time, and he was you got to remember he was getting booed out of the building at the time. You got to remember 94, 95, that Hulkamania shtick. It was done. It was dead and buried.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that whole hulking up that what you gonna do, brother, when these 24-inch pythons run wild on you? Fans didn't care. So turning heel and going Hollywood was that moment where
that was the moment he needed in his career.
Yep, he got that resurgence back. He became over again as the leader of the n.w.o.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, it's hard to deny the constant presence that Hogan, Hall, and Nash had on the n.w.o in its various incarnations over the its 30-year run.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's hard. You couldn't really picture the n.w.o with any other people leading it.
Nope.
You think of the people that were on the roster at the time. Sting was over, but did he really have the chutzpah to really lead the n.w.o like Scott Hall did, like Hulk Hogan did?
Nope.
Like Lex Luger couldn't. No disrespect to Lex Luger, but
Yeah, there is no NWO without Hogan,
Hogan,
Hall, and Nash.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say is long may DX reign, even after almost 30 years. Long may the NWO reign after.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think on that note, I think we can definitely say a good night to this. Put this one away. We hope your night has been too sweet.
And if you don't like it, I've got 2 words for you. Suck it.
Suck it. Thank you very much for listening. I've been your host, Woody, and
Lone Gamer as always.
thank you and good night.